Rosie thought the cottage looked a lot better in the morning light. It had a clear view of the wide, sandy beach, which seemed to stretch for a good mile. And it was a bright, sunny day. A bonus. She had been warned not to expect good weather. You don't go to Ireland for the weather, Carl's mother had told her. At least the children would be occupied today. They loved beaches. She would take her book. She'd begin her work when they'd settled in. She had a couple of articles to write. They had arrived last night, close to midnight, all three of them exhausted from the long drive. The cottage had been difficult to find, despite the neatly typed directions. A few times she wished that she hadn't argued with Carl over adding GPS to the car when they had bought it. "No way, it's just another boy toy," she said. And he had laughed at her indignation and said OK then, but told her he had been thinking of her, really. She was the one with the rotten sense of direction. Carl had been dead 9 months. A fit man of 35, he collapsed and died during the Great North Run. The post-mortem confirmed that he had had a congenital heart defect. Carl had taken part in the run every year since his university days. He and Rosie had met there 12 years ago. She was in her first job as a feature writer for a woman's magazine, doing a piece about marathons. They had clicked at once and had been inseparable from then on, until last year, when the unthinkable happened and her life had changed forever. The next few months passed in a blur of grief and pain. Rosie somehow managed to get the children, Noah, age 7, and Eva, 6, through until the end of the school term. She had politely turned down offers to go with friends on summer holidays to France or to Tuscany. There would be too many memories of holidays they had taken as a family. It was Carl's mum, Peggy, who suggested Donegal. She was from there, and her family still owned a small holiday cottage near Rosebeg. Carl and his brothers had spent a summer there when he was 7. Rosie and Carl had often talked of going to Donegal, but despite all Carl's romanticising about his magical childhood summer, they'd never quite got it together. In search of the sun and the more exotic, they had ended up spending their holidays abroad. This year, Rosie felt Donegal was the only place to be. Somewhere she could be alone with her children. People were kind and meant well, but she was suffocating from a surfeit of sympathy and weary of her role as tragic widow. Perhaps in Ireland she could begin to write again. She had a few commissions. The children could play, and they could all go for long walks. Whatever. She would make it up as she went along. She was staying strong, as the cliché went, for the children's sake. They missed Daddy, and still woke up at night crying for him. A change of scenery would help them heal. Secretly, she felt something of Cal would be there too. She called her editor and explained she would be in touch by email. They were blessed by good weather. They got into a routine and went to the beach for most of the day. There were other families around, and the children soon made friends. Rosie was friendly, but kept her distance from the other parents. They probably assumed she was divorced. Bedtimes were easy. The fresh air literally had them worn out. Late afternoons they drove into the village for ice creams and ingredients for dinner. There was a small supermarket run by a friendly man named Packy. One morning, when they had been there just over a week, they woke up to find the garden was full of cows. Rosie tried to stay calm as she shooed them out. The children were watching, their anxious little faces glued to the window. The dry stone wall around the property had fallen into disrepair over the years, though she noticed most of the stones seemed to be still there, scattered about the fields. That evening after dinner she tried to lift a few of them into place, but they were ridiculously heavy and covered in mosses, and the wall was like a jigsaw puzzle. Eventually she gave up. She hadn't a clue what she was doing. Like her sense of direction, DIY had never been one of her strong points. At bedtime that night, Eva was worried. "The cows won't come and get us in the middle of the night, Mum, will they?" "No, sweetie, of course they won't. I'll call Granny Peggy. She'll know someone who can fix it for us." But Cal's mum couldn't think of anyone. "It's been run down for years. You could always ask Packy at the shop." Packy wasn't much use either. Fix a dry stone wall? Well, that's a dying art these days. People are building a more modern type of walls with breeze blocks or bricks. You know, Spanish style and the like. I reckon Jamesy McGuinness could build you a new wall. But I don't need a new wall. The present one suits the cottage. It just needs the missing stones put back. Packy shook his head. I'll ask around, but I'd say you'd be lucky. Maybe if you're in Ardra, you could put up a notice in the big shop. Ardra was the nearest big town. OK, maybe I'll do that. But she didn't get around to it. A few days later, Rosie and the children made their way up from the beach. They had had a busy day. She had bought them little nets and they had been fishing for hours. Although Noah and Eva seemed to be enjoying the holiday, Rosie was tired. She found it hard to relax, afraid to take her eyes off the children for a minute, fearful of something happening to them too. Eva spotted the man first, weather-beaten and fit. He looked well into his 70s. "Look, Mummy, he's fixing the wall so the cows can't get in." Rosie figured that the man must have arrived soon after they left this morning, because he had already repaired quite a large section. Rosie went up to him. "Did Packy send you?" He looked up at her and smiled. "No, I just heard you wanted the wall mended." "Yes, I certainly do. I'm delighted you can do it." She wondered briefly about the cost, and then decided not to mention it. She held out her hand. "I'm Rosie, and this is Eva. Come and say hello, Noah," she called to her son. Noah came over, swinging his plastic bucket proudly. "What's your name?" he asked. "My name is Mr. T," he replied with a smile. And after examining the contents of the bucket and whistling with appreciation at the few sea creatures Noah had caught, he returned to his work. Mr. T had a strict routine. He arrived each morning just before 7. Rosie didn't sleep well, and she found herself watching out for him to arrive. By the time the children were eating their cereal, he had already been working for well over an hour. He made steady progress. Rosie tried to engage him in conversation a bit, but though friendly, he was a man of few words. He made an exception for the children, allowing them to help by finding the smaller stones and showing him they fitted into the various nooks and crannies. He knew the names of all the flowers Eva found, and told Noah the names of various birds. And of course he knew loads of stories about the fairies. The children listened to all his stories enthralled. "He knows fairies, Mum. He's actually met some," Noah told her as he snuggled down in his bed. Rosie smiled to herself. It was good to see the children so happy. She thanked God for Mr. T. By the end of the first week, he had almost completed one side of the wall. As a treat, Rosie decided to take the children into Donegal town for the day. She'd read there was a railway museum there and some craft shops. She planned for them to eat the evening meal there. She was a bit fed up with endless cooking, and she also wanted to check her emails on broadband. She'd been using the dial-up connection in the house, and it made her impatient. On the way home, just as they were approaching the turn-off for Rose Bag, Noah spotted Mr. T walking along the road. "Oh, Mum, look, there's Mr. T. Can we give him a lift?" Rosie had driven past without seeing him, but the kids missed nothing. She slowed down to wait for him just below the crossroads. The words were hardly out of Noah's mouth when suddenly a car, going at top speed, shot straight through the crossroads without stopping. Rosie felt weak with relief. Had she not stopped for Mr. T, the car certainly would have hit them. He had unwittingly saved their lives. She usually drove so carefully along the winding Donegal roads, but there was no way she could have avoided that. "Gosh, Mum, that man was driving very fast." Noah's eyes widened. Rosie could barely open the window to talk to Mr. T. Her hands were shaking so much. He thanked her for stopping, but he refused the lift. "No, I enjoy the walking. It's good exercise." He said he'd see them in the morning and waved a cheery goodbye. Next day, Rosie sent Noah out to ask Mr. T if he would like some lunch. She felt indebted to him for yesterday. She had rerun the scene at the crossroads in her head several times, her stomach lurching at the thought of what would have happened had she not stopped the car. Mr. T seemed in much cheerier form. He joined them at the long wooden table and polished off his toasted sandwich in no time. The children pestered him with questions, which he answered patiently. Rosie took a wash out to the line. She sensed that he was more comfortable talking to the children alone. She heard them quiz him as she came back in. He had a middle finger missing. Eva was curious. He explained he'd lost it when he was a boy and it had never turned up again. The children accepted this. Rosie tried to keep a straight face. The sun woke them early each morning and shone all day, making the landscape enchanted. So much for all the predictions of miserable Donegal weather. The sunshine was healing the three of them, Rosie felt, making them whole again. She liked to think that Carl had made it shine for them. Rosie got used to people telling her that this was the best summer since 1976, 30 years ago. That would have been the summer Carl spent here when he was 7. Noah's age. Mr. T finished the wall a few days before they were due to leave. The children were heartbroken that they wouldn't be seeing him again. "Well, don't you worry," he told them. "The fairies will be telling me what you're up to. We'll come back next year." "Well, that'd be grand. And the cows can't get near you now." But he had led them up into the field to the cows, and they had both overcome their fear of them. The wall looked perfect. Rosie was unsure how to approach the question of money, but when she did, he refused to take any. "I can't let you work for 5 weeks without pay. Well, sure, what else would I be doing? Now, why don't you put the money in the box for the poor in the chapel? And light a few candles for me while you're there, will you?" She sensed he wouldn't budge on that, so she agreed, and asked if he would pose for a few photos with the children. Eva and Noah sat on the wall, and Mr. T stood between them with a broad grin on his face. The children loved lighting the candles. Rosie felt guilty that they hadn't been to church since Carl's funeral, but she was still mad at God for taking Carl away from them. They left Donegal reluctantly, determined to return next year. In the preschool whirl of the following weeks, Rosie hadn't a moment to think. It was well into September when her mother-in-law came down to visit. Rosie got out her laptop to show her the holiday photos, realising that she hadn't even had time to look at them herself. There they all were, bathed in sunshine. The children running on the beach, digging in the sand, pointing at cows, looking happy again. It was a record of an idyllic summer holiday, except for one thing. There was not a trace of Mr. T in any of the photos. "That's really odd," Rosie said to Peggy as she scrolled through the pictures for the umpteenth time. "I know I took photos of him after he finished the wall. I must have taken a dozen. What did you say his name was?" "Mr. T. Oh, Peggy, he was so good to the children. They absolutely loved him." "What did he look like?" Rosie described him, realising as she did the description would have fitted a number of people. Then she suddenly remembered. He had a middle finger missing. Peggy's face changed. No, it couldn't be him. It's impossible." "Couldn't be who?" "Tommy Docherty. But he was a dab hand at the dry stone walling, and he had a missing finger. But there's no possibility of it being Tommy." "What do you mean?" "Well, poor old Tommy was involved in a nasty accident at the crossroads years ago. The summer of 76, beautiful weather. We were there with the boys. He was driving a tractor-trailer full of stones. He was fixing our wall at the time. I think he'd had a few. He crashed into a family of 4 and killed himself and the father outright. It was very sad. It was in all the papers."